Hello, everyone. It is Sandy Joy with Beneath the Silence, Healing the Wounds of Betrayal Trauma. Today, we're going to talk about betrayal trauma blindness and what that means. But before we get there, I just wanted to say hello to everyone who has already watched a podcast and also to any newcomers. Thank you. Thank you for joining me with the podcast and learning about betrayal trauma and all of the various components that make up what betrayal trauma is. And I hope that you find it helpful and especially finding that you're not alone. That's the main thing. So I want to acknowledge that last podcast, so episode 5, which was in part 1 and part 2 on complex trauma, was very heavy. It's very heavy. A lot of information, a lot of research, um, to know that how it differs, from PTSD, from a single event, was really important to share. And I wanted to share all the information that came with that. Okay. So for those of you who are new to my podcast, just know that I don't edit. These are real, live, vulnerable, and why raw, they're raw, very raw. And why is that important? It's so you can be vulnerable, that we're human beings and we're not perfect. And if I can't be vulnerable with you in a place that I'm trying to create this community and safety, then who can be vulnerable? Okay. So I also want to acknowledge that the topics for today, betrayal, blindness, deals with, it's very sensitive, but it's an important mechanism of survival in betrayal trauma. Okay. So, have you ever looked back at a relationship or situation, and wondered, how did I not see that was happening? You're not alone because it's not because you were weak or naive. It is in betrayal trauma, our mind, our brain sometimes protects us by hiding the truth from us. So today we're going to dive into betrayal trauma blindness, why it happens, how it works, and how we can gently open our eyes to see reality without shattering ourselves. Okay. So betrayal trauma blindness was coined and researched. You'll hear me talk a lot in betrayal trauma about Dr. Jennifer Fried and Dr. Pamela Burrell in their book Blind to Betrayal. But the research by Dr. Jennifer Fried it is very, very important. Okay. She has coined and researched this term, betrayal blindness. So according to Fried and Burrell, the definition of the word blind has changed and evolved over time to have two interconnected fundamental meanings. So the first one is unable to see, and the second one is unwilling or unable to perceive or understand. So I'm going to match that with Oxford Dictionary definition of what they define blindness as. And the first, very similar, is unable to see, but it says the state or condition of being unable to see because of injury, disease, or congenital condition. And the second definition from the Oxford Dictionary is lack of perception, awareness, or judgment, ignorance. Okay. And I don't mean ignorance, and I'm sure they don't mean ignorance in a negative sense. It's that we're not able to see, again, because our brain is not allowing us to see. So both meanings are integral to the phrase betrayal trauma blindness. And Fried and Burrow have not meant to encompass physical blindness or subscribe to a form of institutionalized betrayal that sees the idolized body as one we measure as our benchmark of ability, and all other bodies are less able. That's not the meaning and why behind the definition of blindness. It's that betrayal blindness can also occur when we do not hear, feel, or recognize what may be obviously discernible by others. Okay. Fried and Burrell use the phrase betrayal blindness because it so effectively encompasses what they mean and aim to convey. And currently, there's no other term that describes that their full meaning. Okay. So, betrayal blindness occurs when acknowledging the betrayal would threaten our survival, the attachment to the perpetrator, or access to critical resources. Okay. And it's not about denial, it's an adaptive, subconscious protection strategy that our brain does. Okay. So, how it does it develop? In childhood, needing caregivers for safety and survival. So our mind protects the attachment to that caregiver by filtering reality. Because if we don't filter reality, we withdraw from the caregiver. And therefore, that may mean we were withdrawing from the only love we may know, whatever type of love that may look like, shelter, food, attention, etc., etc. And in adulthood, it's relying on a partner, our community, our society, institutions that can trigger the same mechanism. That if we acknowledge the betrayal, if we are aware of the betrayal, it may mean there is a withdrawal from society, from the partner, from you know, the institutions, etc., that we rely on for our survival, our safety. Okay. The cost of seeing might feel too great in the moment. So I'm going to start with dissociation. Many people have heard of dissociation. Many people don't realize that they've dissociated, and I'm going to get into that in a moment. So, Fried and DePrince, 2001, described dissociation or define dissociation as a disruption in the incorporation of thoughts, feelings, and experiences into conscious awareness. So, knowing the definition of dissociation is vital to the understanding of blindness. In addition, we often associate this term with assessments and diagnoses from the DSM criteria. What we don't take into account is the negative implication to those who experience dissociation, especially as it's almost always something our brain does for us in survival. Okay? Dissociation is in the freeze, fight, flight, fawn, or fold. It is dissociation is heavily in the fold. Okay. We may not realize how many of us have actually dissociated. So think about you get home from work and you don't remember the drive, the walk, or the ride. That's dissociation. We may be in a lot of stress or under stress, and our mind is in on that stress or on an issue that we're having. But that is a type of a form of dissociation. And I would argue that we've all done it at one point or another, or at one time or another. So, betrayal trauma theory, as I talked about in the first episode, is dissociation, which is a form of mental blindness, can be essential for survival. Okay? If you're working with a therapist or you are in the helping field, it is part of the role of that therapist to understand or help you understand the why that you encounter dissociation. And when betrayal trauma is present, it's blindness, and it's objective. And that's part of their role, is to help you understand that. This understanding can then help alleviate any shame, guilt, responsibility. So remember, um, from episode 4, we talked about internalization. That's where we take on responsibility in betrayal trauma. Okay, so this helps us when we understand what blindness is. It helps alleviate some of that responsibility, if not all of it, and also fear that you may have, or if you're in the helping field, clients may have. Okay. So what are the signs and or before actually I get to signs and symptoms, I'm going to also talk about partial blindness, because betrayal trauma blindness may not be absolutely absolute across the board. We may have some memory of some things, but not memory of more difficult or more painful components of the betrayal. Okay. And this is from Linden and Gray. So, partial blindness, or the separation of certain information while retaining other details, can happen, and that's important to know. Then we also have what's called rotating blindness. So we may have betrayal blindness and then have knowing, and we go back into blindness. So once we go, we go into knowing it again, it's not linear. We just continue on that path. It's fluid, it's rotating. We can go back into blindness and back into knowing multiple times. Typically, when we go back into knowing, we keep some of that knowing, even if we rotate back into blindness. Okay. And this rotating blindness occurs when a person is conscious of the betrayal at one instant, but after a period of time finds themselves talking, behaving, or feeling as if they're unaware of the betrayal again, a betrayal in a relationship. And this can happen to children, and it can happen to adults alike. Okay. When remembering is too risky, the brain automatically helps the body to be unaware of the betrayal. It's subconscious, not conscious, subconscious. Okay. Now we're going to go into signs and symptoms. So, one of the signs is rationalizing harmful behaviors. And this can be molestations, sexual abuse, sexual assault. It can be physical assault, it can be psychological abuse, verbal abuse. It's avoiding evidence of harm. So a friend may say, "Do you realize that was abusive, what your partner just said to you?" And it's like, "Oh, no, no, he didn't really mean it. He didn't really mean it." We're avoiding evidence of harm. It's minimizing or forgetting critical events. And it's feeling foggy or confused when trying to recall the truth, trying to recall what happened. Like, did he really say that? No, it couldn't have said that. Did she say that? Did they do that? No, they couldn't have. I must have been dreaming or had a nightmare. Okay. Now we're going to go on to why it's not your fault. Why it's not your fault. So remember, this is about survival, not failure. It is about survival. And it's something the brain does for us. The brain and our nervous system, they work to protect us from overwhelming reality. Okay. And I want you to think of our emotions as charged emotions, like that's difficult emotions, painful emotions that we may have, scary, fearful emotions versus neutral emotions. So, what our brain helps us to focus on is those things that are neutral. It's colors, it's the color of clothing. It is, I'm going to give you an example. During, and this is maybe hard to hear. Okay, so I just want to just do a disclaimer here. During a rape, a woman could not identify the rapist who was, 3 inches away from their face, but could, in minute detail, no pun intended, the clock on the wall could describe it. But the clock had a neutral charge because what was happening was highly charged. They had to focus. That was going into dissociation and blindness. Okay. So knowing and not knowing. Perpetrators groom survivors, victims or survivors, to be blind. Okay. How they do this is often done through charm, wit, and kindness, either real kindness or fake. Moving on through then the gaslighting, the manipulation, the deceit, and other psychological abuse. Survivors believe that they are at fault across the board in betrayal trauma, regardless of what kind of betrayal trauma it is or what type, that the survivors go, they must be have done something wrong or are doing something wrong, and that they are the cause of the perpetrator's abuse. Okay. So as you may have heard people say, I always seem to date people who cheat on me or who abuse me, the patterns. Okay. Clients also say, I'm very intelligent. How could I have not known, what they, meaning the perpetrator, were doing? How could I not know my husband was having affairs? How could I not know there was a pornography addiction? How could I have been so stupid? It's the brain didn't want you to know. And also, some of these things, or many of these things, especially when it has to do with addiction, porn addiction, sex addiction, are done in secrecy. Remember the secret sexual basement we talked about in the last couple of episodes? So, blindness is a result of this grooming, as well as one's own survival of abusive and or otherwise unsafe relationships. Okay? And then there's also a demand for silence. And when I talk about demand for silence, this is a strong demand from the perpetrators that don't talk about it, don't tell anybody. There's a loyalty to the perpetrator. What if they want to get better? What if they're going to stop? You know, this is also demand for silence within families, especially dysfunctional families, within religions, within cultures, within society, within institutions. There's a demand, do not talk about it. Okay. So we are forced to be silent and not speak of the atrocities that happened to us, not that we caused, that happened to us. Okay. Personally, or from what we've witnessed in our world, or by the perpetrator, our family, our culture, our society. This force may be due to safety from further abuse, okay, threats, family dysfunction, cultural norms, dynamics, and or by means of oppression and discrimination. Those are all demands for silence. And we go, okay, well, how can society turn a blind eye? I'm going to talk about that as well as bystander blindness. So, how does society turn a blind eye? Think of multiple stories in the media about the Catholic Church. And I don't want to just single out, just the Catholic Church, because it can happen in all religions where there is priests or clergy of any kind that are molesting, children, our children. And in the Catholic Church, they turned a blind eye and they moved the priest from one diocese to another. And that was solving the problem. Okay. It is, I'm trying to, okay, you know, it's residential schools, you know, missing and exploited children, missing Indigenous women and girls. How many of us have turned a blind eye? Racism, and we don't say anything. Oh, our friend was just joking. Racism is never a joke. Never. It's discrimination. And our laws of government that make it easy to create further inequities to already marginalized populations. Just think right now what is happening in the United States to immigrants, to people of color, to people who speak a different language other than English. English may be their second language. To those in the LGBTQ to S plus communities, to women. How many of us turn a blind eye? And then bystander blindness. We may witness something, but then we stay with the status quo because we question our own reality, even though deep down our instincts are going, that's not right, that's not real. But there's some psychic, if you will, numbing that has to do with things that are horrific. You know, this could be fear of alienation. This could be fear of not fitting in, danger to self or loved ones if we told what was going on. When we think of the organization and gathering of Indigenous children, removing them from their families, and placed in residential schools by priests, nuns, and the RCMP are examples of bystander betrayal blindness. If it started with the Catholic and then Protestant church and our government, but if the government told the RCMP, you go pick up those children, they turn a blind eye, bystander blindness, because they were being told what to do. Think of the military, the meeting with 800 generals and special military personnel in the United States that just happened on the 30th of September. We can't turn a blind eye, and I'm in Canada. We can't turn a blind eye. Okay? But we do. So, other examples that are on a grand scheme include the Holocaust, molestation of thousands of boys and girls by priests and Catholic Church, and the events that are currently taking place in the Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, Gaza, and the Congo right now, to name a few. We can add removal of the rights of women, especially in the United States, and the threats to all other marginalized communities. The list is endless. Can you tell I'm very passionate about this? It's I'm going to give you an example of the children's book, The Emperor's New Clothes. The new people that came in to, the seamstress to sew the new clothes, they were crooks and they didn't have any material. And so they convinced the emperor that in his nakedness, that only those in high power and special people can see these clothes. And it was okay to go out in the parade. And those people that were watching were going, is he naked? He's naked? But nobody would say anything until one person was brave enough courageous enough to say, the emperor is not wearing any clothes. That others go, oh, you're right. The emperor is not wearing any clothes. He's naked. That the emperor had to go and get covered up. That is bystander blindness. We have to find our courage to speak up, speak out. And sometimes, and that again, why the podcast? This is to help those survivors and those victims who no longer have a voice, but those survivors who may not feel ready to share their voice. That it's important. Okay. It's also healing begins when we understand that this is adaptive. It's not shameful. It's it's how we adapt, how our brains adapt. I want to talk about also, regaining, I'm just looking at my notes here. Uh, sorry, regaining and recovered memories, because this is where in our justice, or I like to say injustice system, often they that lawyers and judges, I feel every single one needs to be trained in betrayal trauma and trauma, but betrayal trauma especially, because they don't often understand, and especially when there's betrayal trauma, that regaining and recovery memories, how that works or how that is implicated in a survivor's testimony and not having the memories. Um, According to Fried into Prince in 2001, no studies have shown to date, and still it's very, very rare, that the more continuous or current a memory is, the more accurate it is. It's so whether a memory has been with us for most of our life or emerged during therapy, neither is inherently more accurate than the other. It is crucial that we not focus on how recently a memory was recovered or its factual accuracy. What matters, truly matters, is that this happened, whatever in betrayal, this is what happened. We don't need to know the details or the accuracy of the details. It's the fact that this happened. What truly matters is how this recovered memory affects the client, affects you in the present sense, in the present moment. And that's the aspect that needs to be worked on. How is this impacting you now? And that's what we can work on. Okay. So, pathways to awareness. It's gradual exposure to truth. It's supported by safe relationships. If you are a friend, family member, or in the helping field, name it, name it, name it, name it, name it. Name it betrayal trauma. Name betrayal blindness. If your client or your family member or friend is not ready to hear it, they won't hear it. But name it. It's important. Okay. This is a quote from myself that I coined, because the more we begin to acknowledge and know, the more that knowing grows. So when we name it, a seed is planted. Okay. It's gentle, non-shaming self-reflection. This is part of having self-compassion. That this is treating yourself as you would your best friend, okay, as you would your child. It's non-shaming. It's understanding that you didn't cause or chose to have betrayal blindness. It was what your brain did for you in survival. It's then seeking trauma-informed therapy, somatic practices, so you get to learn the messages your body is trying to tell you, because our body's trying to talk to us all the time. My back is really telling me right now that I shouldn't have fallen. and or slipped. Okay. It's keeping compassion at the center of the process. And that is especially is self-compassion. Because the hour or two or whatever it is that you may be working with your therapist, they may have compassion and empathy, but think of the hundreds and thousands of hours you were with yourself. That self-compassion is so important. I'm going to read you a little blurb from Blind to Betrayal from um, um, Brydenborough about a woman named Julie. Names have been changed to protect identity. Julie had a history of a husband who was financial abusive. She had no access to money, was verbally abusive, was threatening, physical abuse, and had numerous infidelities. Okay. So, why would Julie not know there's something there for the knowing? The answer likely resided in her need to survive. During the initial period of her marriage, Julie had a powerful, although unconscious, motivation for remaining blind to her husband's betrayal. She was utterly dependent on her husband. She couldn't leave. She had no money. She lived in the country with a very young child and didn't have access to a vehicle. Only one vehicle, her husband had it. She was trapped in many ways. Knowing about the betrayal would have required some action, yet she could not afford to rock the boat. Sometimes ignorance can preserve the relative bliss of the status quo when knowledge would inevitably lead to chaos. Julie could not go into the chaos until she was ready. Ignorance is bliss when it allows us to survive. That's from page 5, first paragraph. But I'll send the link. The links for all the references will be here. Okay. So when we can break free of self-blame, we've made a huge gain in healing. Takeaways for today is betrayal blindness is an adaptive survival response, not a weakness, not failure, not a flaw. It develops when the cost of seeing the truth feels greater than the cost of staying unaware. Healing comes from safe, compassionate awareness over time. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining me today. Next episode 7, will be on attachment. I touched on it a little bit today, but it's on attachment and betrayal trauma and how broken trust shapes our relationships. And I want to thank you. I want to thank you for joining me on Beneath the Silence, Healing the Wounds of Betrayal Trauma. I want you to remember that healing is possible, even from those deepest, deepest, darkest, painful wounds. For more resources and information, or if you're interested in finding out about my betrayal trauma course, please visit my website at sandrajoy.ca. If you have any questions for me, comments, you can reach me through my website or comment on YouTube. And please, please, if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, like and share the podcast so others may also learn and find community. It helps the algorithms, and I get paid no money for these, just so you know. Sharing is caring. Okay. And until next time, take gentle care of yourself. And remember, I see you, I hear you, and I believe you. Until we meet again, thank you.